During Thanksgiving dinner, my son pushed me out of my chair and said, "That chair isn't for you, Mom. It's for my father-in-law." In front of the entire family, I was pushed away from the head of the table. No one spoke. No one defended me. The room went silent, and in that silence, I understood something chilling. This wasn't about a chair. It was about power. So I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I looked my son in the eye and said 4 words, and that was the night everything they'd built began to collapse. Welcome to Family Revenge Stories. Thank you for being here and watching this story. Before the story goes any further, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what the temperature is where you are right now. Your voice helps this channel grow and brings this community together. Also, please note, this story contains fictional elements crafted for storytelling and educational reflection. Any resemblance to real names or places is purely coincidental, but the message behind the story is meant to make you think. The wrench slipped from my hand and clattered onto the concrete floor of the barn. I muttered under my breath. Nothing colorful, just the kind of frustration that comes from fighting a stubborn bolt on a 40-year-old tractor when the light's already fading. November in Iowa doesn't give you much daylight to work with, and I'd been at this since lunch. I'm Calvin Barlow, 68 years old, though most days my back reminds me I might as well be 80. This farm, 380 acres of black Iowa soil, has been in my family for 4 generations. My great-grandfather broke this ground with a team of horses. My grandfather survived the Dust Bowl. My father handed me the keys to the John Deere when I was 16 and told me, "Don't let it die on your watch." I haven't. The barn smelled like engine oil and old hay, familiar and grounding. I bent down to pick up the wrench, my knees protesting, and that's when my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I almost didn't answer. Telemarketers love to call right around dinner time. But the name on the screen stopped me cold. Trevor, my son, 43 years old, lives 20 miles east in one of those new subdivisions where every house looks the same and nobody knows their neighbors' names. We used to talk every week, then every month. Well, it's been about 3 years since we had a real conversation. The kind where you actually say what you mean. I wiped my hands on my jeans and answered, "Dad?" His voice sounded tight, rehearsed even. "Trevor, everything all right?" Yeah, everything's fine." A pause. "Listen, Natalie and I were talking and we'd like you to come for Thanksgiving. Dinner at our place, around 6. I straightened up, caught off guard. Thanksgiving. The last few years I'd spent it alone with a Swanson turkey dinner and the Packers game on TV. Mary used to make the whole spread turkey, stuffing her famous pecan pie. The house felt too big without her. Still does. She passed away 6 years ago, and some days it feels like yesterday. "You sure about that?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Of course I'm sure." He sounded almost offended. "You're my father, and Miles keeps asking about you." Miles, my grandson. 19 now, probably halfway through his first semester at college. Smart kid. Good kid. I hadn't seen him since last Christmas, and even then, it was just a quick handshake in a grocery store parking lot. Miles asked about me. "Yeah, he misses his grandpa." Trevor's voice softened just a little. "So, what do you say 6 o'clock Thanksgiving Day?" I should have said no. Something in my gut was already twisting the same instinct that tells you a storm's coming before the sky goes dark. But the thought of seeing Miles again, of maybe just maybe closing the gap that had opened up between me and my son, that was enough. "Who else is coming?" I asked. "Just family. Natalie's parents will be there. Preston and Lorraine." Preston Pemberton. I'd met him twice. Sharp dresser, firm handshake, the kind of man who smiles with his mouth but not his eyes. He'd made a fortune in finance or so, Trevor said, and retired early to one of those gated communities where they measure your worth by your golf handicap. I couldn't stand him, but I kept that to myself. Sounds like a full house, I said. It will be, so. You'll come. I glanced around the barn. The tractor could wait. The fields weren't going anywhere. And maybe, just maybe, this was the olive branch I'd been waiting for. I'll be there, I said. Great, 6 o'clock, don't be late. He hung up before I could say anything else. I stood there in the dimming light, phone still in my hand, staring at the screen. Something about that call didn't sit right. Trevor's voice had been off. Not warm, not casual, like he was reading from a script. Like someone was standing over his shoulder telling him what to say. I shook my head. I was overthinking it. Trevor was my son. He wanted me at Thanksgiving. That was a good thing, wasn't it? I slipped the phone back into my pocket and returned to the tractor. The bolt finally gave way on the third try, and I spent the next hour finishing the repair as the sun disappeared behind the western tree line. By the time I walked back to the house, my hands were stiff from the cold, and my mind was elsewhere. Mary's voice echoed in my head the way it sometimes did when I needed her most. Trust your gut, Cal. It's never steered you wrong. I locked the barn door and looked out across the fields. The land stretched out in every direction, dark and silent under the November sky. 4 generations of Barlows had worked this soil. 4 generations of sweat and sacrifice. It was mine to protect, mine to pass down. I just didn't know yet that someone was already planning to take it. I said yes to that Thanksgiving invitation. 2 weeks later, I'd realized that dinner would cost me everything I'd built and everyone I thought I knew. The front door swung open before I could knock. Trevor stood in the doorway, backlit by warm light from inside, wearing a sweater I didn't recognize, and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Behind him, I could hear voices, laughter, the clinking of glasses. The smell of roasted turkey drifted out into the cold November air. "Dad, you made it." He stepped aside. "Come in." I handed him the bottle of wine I'd picked up, nothing fancy, just something to bring. Trevor took it without looking at the label and hung my coat in the closet. The house was bigger than I remembered. Open floor plan, vaulted ceilings, granite countertops. The kind of place you see in magazines. Trevor worked in medical equipment sales, but this house seemed like it cost more than his salary could cover. "Everyone's in the dining room," he said. I followed him through the living room and into the dining room where a long table had been set for 8. Crystal glasses, cloth napkins, candles, and autumn leaves arranged in the center. And there at the far end of the table stood Preston Pemberton, tall, silver-haired navy blazer over a crisp white shirt. His smile was wide and confident, the kind that says, "I own every room I walk into." He crossed the room and extended his hand. "Calvin, good to see you." His grip was firm. Too firm. "Trevor's told us so much about the farm. 4th generation, isn't it?" "That's right. Remarkable. That kind of legacy is rare these days." He clapped me on the shoulder like we were old friends. Most people don't have the discipline to build something that lasts. Preston had a way of talking that made everything sound like a compliment and a judgment at the same time. Preston let the man breathe. Lorraine Pemberton appeared at her husband's side, elegant in a cream-colored blouse and pearls. She offered me a polite smile and a brief handshake. Her fingers were cold. "Calvin, thank you for joining us." "Grandpa." I turned, and there was Miles, grinning ear to ear. He wrapped me in a hug that nearly knocked the wind out of me. 19 years old, broad-shouldered, taller than me now. "Hey, kiddo," I squeezed his shoulder. "You've grown." "Yeah, well, college food'll do that," he laughed. "How's the farm?" Still standing, Natalie appeared in the doorway carrying a bowl of mashed potatoes. She glanced at me, offered a tight smile, and set the bowl on the table without a word. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted the placement. She didn't meet my eyes. All right, everyone, let's sit, Trevor said. Dinner's ready. We found our seats. Preston settled at one end of the table, Lorraine to his right. Trevor sat across from her, Natalie beside him. Miles slid into the chair next to me, and at the other end, the head of the table where I'd always sat when Mary hosted Thanksgiving, there was an empty chair. Dishes were passed. Glasses were filled. Preston launched into a story about a trip to Napa Valley, something about vineyard tours and wine auctions. Lorraine smiled on cue. Natalie laughed at the right moments. Trevor nodded along, his jaw tight. I ate in silence, the weight of the empty chair pressing on me. Preston's voice filled the room, confident, measured, just loud enough to make sure everyone was listening. He talked about investments, about opportunities, about a project that was going to change everything. He didn't ask about anyone else's life. He didn't need to. Trevor sat between us, shoulders hunched, pushing food around his plate like a man caught between two worlds. I glanced at Miles. He was watching his father, concern flickering across his face. And then I noticed Preston's hand resting on the back of the empty chair, the one at the head of the table. My chair. He caught me looking and smiled. After what felt like an eternity, Preston set down his fork and cleared his throat. The table fell quiet. Before we go any further, he said, I'd like to say a few words. Everyone turned toward him. Lorraine folded her hands in her lap. Natalie's expression was unreadable. Trevor stared at his plate. Thanksgiving is about gratitude, Preston began. About appreciating what we have and recognizing the people who make our lives possible. Family, legacy, the foundations we build for the next generation. He paused, letting the words settle. I'm grateful for this beautiful home that Trevor and Natalie have built. For Miles, who's making us all proud. And for Lorraine, my rock for 37 years. Lorraine smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Preston turned his gaze toward me. No, and Calvin, we're grateful you could join us tonight. The farm, the land that's been in your family for generations, that kind of legacy deserves respect. The way he said legacy made my skin crawl, like he was already appraising it. But legacy isn't just about what we inherit, Preston continued. It's about what we do with it, how we steward it, how we pass it on to those who can truly make it thrive. I felt the room tilt. Trevor wouldn't look at me. Natalie was gripping her napkin like a lifeline. Miles's jaw was set, his eyes locked on his grandfather. So tonight, Preston said, raising his glass, let's be grateful for family, for tradition, and for the wisdom to know when to hold on and when to let go. He smiled again, that polished, calculated smile, and took a sip of his wine. No one else drank. The silence stretched thick and suffocating. Preston gestured toward the head of the table. Now why don't we take our seats and begin? I hesitated, but tradition pulled me forward. I moved toward the empty chair, weaving around the table, my boots heavy on the hardwood floor. The chair was waiting, high-backed, solid oak. The same kind my grandfather used to sit in. I reached for it, my hand closing around the wood. A hand gripped my shoulder. I froze. The pressure was firm, insistent, pulling me back before I could even think about sitting down. Dad. Trevor's voice, low, strained. That seat's not for you. I turned. My son stood inches away, his face pale, his jaw set. Behind him, Preston watched from across the table, arms crossed, expression unreadable. What? I said that seat's not for you. Trevor's voice was louder now, filling the room. He stepped between me and the chair, his hand still on my shoulder. This seat is for my father-in-law. The words hung in the air like smoke. For a moment I thought I'd misheard, that this was some kind of joke. But Trevor wasn't smiling. His eyes were hard, almost desperate, like a man who'd rehearsed this moment 100 times and still couldn't believe he was going through with it. Trevor, so this is Preston's seat. He cut me off. He's family. He's earned it. I glanced around the table. Natalie was staring at her plate, her knuckles white around her napkin. Lorraine's expression was frozen, polite, but distant. Miles sat rigid in his chair, his eyes locked on me, pain written all over his face. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. No one spoke. "Son," I said quietly, keeping my voice steady. "This is tradition. Your great-grandfather sat in this chair. Your grandfather. Me. And one day you." Not tonight." Trevor's hand tightened on my shoulder. "Tonight it's Preston's." "Trevor." Preston's voice was calm, almost gentle. "It's fine. Calvin can sit wherever he'd like." But it wasn't fine. We all knew it. This wasn't about a chair. This was about something bigger. Something I didn't understand yet. I looked at my son, really looked at him. The way his shoulders were hunched. The way his hand trembled just slightly on my shoulder. The way his eyes darted toward Preston, and then away like he was afraid of disappointing him. And in that moment, I saw it. Trevor wasn't standing up to me. He was standing for someone else. "Step aside, son." My voice was firm now. I'm sitting in my chair. Trevor didn't move. Instead, he shifted his weight, planting himself between me and the seat. His hand left my shoulder and pressed against my chest, not hard, but deliberate. Blocking me. "I'm sorry, Dad," his voice cracked, "but this is how it is now." And then he pushed. It wasn't violent. It wasn't a shove meant to hurt. But it was firm enough to make me take a step back, my boots scraping against the hardwood. Firm enough to make it clear that he wasn't going to let me sit. The room went completely silent. Miles shot to his feet. "Dad, what are you—" "Sit down, Miles." Trevor's voice was sharp. He didn't look at his son. He didn't look at me. He stared at the floor, his chest rising and falling like he'd just run a mile. I stood there, one hand braced against the table, trying to process what had just happened. My son, my own son, had just pushed me away. In front of his family. In front of Preston. In front of everyone. Preston cleared his throat. "Well, this is unfortunate." He gestured toward an empty seat near the other end of the table. "Calvin, why don't you sit over here? We'll still have a nice dinner." I didn't move. I couldn't. My legs felt like lead. Trevor finally looked at me. His eyes were red, his jaw trembling. But he didn't apologize. He didn't take it back. "Trevor." Natalie's voice was barely a whisper. "Maybe. No." Trevor cut her off. He straightened, squaring his shoulders, and took a step toward Preston's side of the table. "This is the right thing." The right thing. I looked at Miles. He was still standing, fists clenched at his sides, staring at his father like he didn't recognize him. I looked at Preston. He met my gaze, his expression perfectly neutral. But there was something in his eyes. Satisfaction. Control. This was his doing. I didn't know how or why, but I knew it in my bones. I took a breath. Let it out slowly. And when I spoke, my voice was calm, steady. The kind of calm that comes from years of weathering storms. "You'll regret this, son." 4 words, that's all I said. Trevor flinched like I'd struck him. But he didn't respond. He just stood there, frozen, his hands shaking at his sides. I turned and walked toward the door. No one stopped me. No one said a word. Behind me, I heard Preston's voice, smooth and reassuring. "Let's all sit down and finish our meal. No sense letting this ruin the evening." I grabbed my coat from the closet and stepped out into the cold. The door clicked shut behind me, cutting off the muffled voices inside. The November air bit at my skin, sharp and unforgiving. I walked to my truck keys, heavy in my hand. The street was quiet. The neighbors' houses glowed with warm light, families gathered inside, probably laughing, probably happy. I climbed into the driver's seat and sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. "You'll regret this, son." I didn't know it then, but those 4 words would unravel a conspiracy worth more than Trevor or Preston could ever imagine. They'd uncover lies buried for years. They'd expose a man who'd spent decades building his fortune on the backs of people who trusted him. And they'd force my son to choose between the father who raised him and the man who was destroying him. I turned the key. The engine coughed to life. The drive home was the longest 30 minutes of my life. The headlights cut through the darkness, 2 pale beams stretching across empty fields. My hands gripped the steering wheel, the engine humming low beneath me. The heater rattled, pushing warm air into the cab, but I couldn't shake the cold that had settled into my bones. I passed the Hutchins feed store closed up for the night, its sign dark against the November sky. A mile later, the co-op's grain elevator rose up on my left. These roads, I'd driven them 1,000 times. I knew every curve, every pothole, every farmhouse tucked back behind windbreaks of oak and cottonwood. But tonight it all felt different. Mary's voice drifted into my thoughts, soft and steady, the way it always did when I needed her most. "Cal, what does your gut say?" My gut said something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. I thought about Trevor. Not the man who'd stood in that dining room tonight, but the boy he used to be. 7 years old, following me around the farm, asking 100 questions. 10 years old, learning to drive the pickup, grinning so wide I thought his face might split. 16, working sunup to sundown during harvest, never once complaining. He'd been a good kid. Honest, hard-working, the kind of son who'd look you in the eye when he shook your hand. What had changed him? The answer came slowly. Natalie. 3 years ago. She'd been polite at first, a little distant maybe, but I'd chalked that up to nerves. Then came the engagement, the wedding, and somewhere along the way, Trevor started pulling back. Fewer phone calls, fewer visits, always an excuse. And then Preston entered the picture. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. A father-in-law taking an interest, offering advice. Maybe financial help. Trevor had mentioned a business opportunity once, though he'd been vague. But tonight, watching the way Trevor looked at Preston like a man seeking approval or maybe permission, I realized it wasn't advice Preston had been offering. It was control. My jaw tightened. I eased off the gas as I approached the turnoff to County Road 12, the truck's tires crunching over gravel. The dashboard clock read 8:17. This wasn't about a chair. It wasn't about tradition or respect. It was about everything I'd built, everything my father and grandfather had built. 4 generations of sweat and sacrifice, all of it, sitting on 380 acres of Iowa soil, and someone wanted it. The realization hit me hard. I pulled over onto the shoulder and put the truck in park. My hands were shaking. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying to steady myself. Why? The farm was profitable, not wildly, but enough. Good years and bad years like everyone else. The land was paid off, had been since my father's time. No debts, no liens, nothing that would make someone come after it, unless there was something I didn't know. I thought about Preston's toast. Legacy isn't just about what we inherit. It's about what we do with it. The wisdom to know when to hold on and when to let go. He'd been talking about me, about the farm. I forced myself to breathe. Getting angry wouldn't help. Anger made you sloppy. Mary used to say that too. Don't let them see you angry, Cal. Let them see you thinking. I pulled back onto the road, the engine growling as I picked up speed. The turnoff to the farm appeared ahead. The old wooden sign, barely visible, Barlow Farm, St. 1898. I didn't want revenge. That wasn't who I was, but I needed the truth. If someone was trying to take what was mine, what was ours, I needed to know why. Helena Crawford. The name came to me like a lifeline. She'd been our family lawyer for as long as I could remember. Sharp as a tack, even at 72. She'd handled my father's estate. She'd drawn up Mary's will. She knew every inch of this farm's history, every deed and contract and piece of paper that tied the Barlow name to this land. If anyone could help me, it was her. The farmhouse came into view, its windows dark, the porch light casting a pale yellow glow. I pulled into the gravel driveway and killed the engine. For a moment, I just sat there. The house felt bigger than it should, emptier. Mary had been gone 6 years, but some nights it felt like yesterday. Some nights I still expected to see the kitchen light on, smell coffee brewing, hear her voice calling me in from the barn. Tonight was one of those nights. I climbed out of the truck and looked up at the sky. Clear and cold stars scattered across the black. Miles had looked at me with such pain in his eyes, like he wanted to speak up but couldn't. Like he was watching something break and didn't know how to stop it. That boy deserved better. Trevor deserved better. And I was going to make sure they got it. I walked up the porch steps, the old boards creaking under my weight. Inside the house was dark and silent. I flipped on the kitchen light and set my keys on the counter. The clock on the wall read 8:28. Too late to call Helena tonight. But first thing tomorrow morning, I'd dial her number. I wasn't looking for a fight. I wasn't looking to destroy anyone. But I was looking for answers. And the truth, whatever it was, would be worth more than Preston could ever imagine. When I pulled into the driveway, the farmhouse felt emptier than ever. But I wasn't alone, not anymore. Downtown Des Moines was quiet the morning after Thanksgiving. Most of the shops were still closed, their windows dark, the streets nearly empty except for a few cars, and the occasional pedestrian bundled against the cold. I found parking on the street outside the Meridian building, a 4-story brick structure that had probably been there since the 50s, the kind of place that didn't need to impress anyone. Helena Crawford's office was on the 3rd floor. I took the stairs, my knees protested, but I needed the time to gather my thoughts. By the time I reached her door, the frosted glass panel etched with Crawford and Associates, estate law, I'd rehearsed what I was going to say 6 times. None of it sounded right. The door swung open before I could knock. Calvin Barlow. Helena stood in the doorway, a slim woman with steel gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a cardigan over a blouse and slacks. She didn't look 72. Sharp eyes, steady hands, the kind of presence that made you sit up straighter without meaning to. I was wondering when you'd show up. You were expecting me. Let's just say I had a feeling. She stepped aside. Come in, coffee's fresh. Her office was exactly what I'd expected, bookcases lining the walls crammed with leather-bound volumes and case files. A mahogany desk sat near the window, papers stacked neatly in wire trays, framed degrees on the wall. A photo of her late husband on the credenza. She poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot on a side table and handed me one. Black. Strong. The way I liked it. Sit. She gestured to a chair across from her desk. I sat. Helena settled into her chair and studied me over the rim of her cup. You look like hell, Calvin. Rough night, I imagine. She set down her cup. So, tell me what happened. I told her. Not every detail, I didn't need to relive it word by word, but enough. The dinner. Preston's toast. The empty chair at the head of the table. Trevor blocking me. The push. Helena listened, without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and folded her hands in her lap. And you left. I left. Did Trevor try to stop you? She nodded slowly, like she was filing that away. What about Miles, Natalie? Miles looked like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. Natalie wouldn't even look at me. Helena was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. Then she leaned forward, elbows on the desk. Shiru, Calvin, I need you to answer some questions, and I need you to be honest with me. All right. How's the farm doing financially? I blinked, caught off guard. Fine. We're profitable. Not rich, but comfortable. Last year, we cleared about $260,000 after expenses. This year's looking to be closer to $280,000. That's none. Land's been paid off since my father's time. Sabitmings. Around $180,000, give or take. Helena's eyes narrowed. And Trevor knows this. He should. I've never hidden it from him. She nodded, jotting something down on a legal pad. What about your will? Is it current? Sadie, Mary and I had it drawn up about 10 years ago. Everything goes to Trevor. The land, the house, the equipment, all of it. Any conditions. Just that he keep the farm in the family. Pass it down to Miles or his kids if he has any. Helena set down her pen and looked at me. Calvin, I'm going to be blunt. Trevor's behavior last night, that's not normal. That's not a son having a disagreement with his father. That's a son under pressure. Significant pressure. From Preston. Most likely. She tapped her fingers on the desk. The question is why? What does Preston gain from isolating you, from turning Trevor against you? I didn't have an answer. Helena stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the street below. I've been practicing law for 40 years. I've seen families torn apart over money, over land, over things that didn't matter in the end. But this, she turned back to me. This feels different. A different how calculated. Preston didn't just show up at Thanksgiving and decide to humiliate you on a whim. He's been working on Trevor for a while, building influence, creating dependency. The words landed heavy. What do I do? I asked. Helena returned to her desk and pulled a business card from a drawer. She slid it across to me. Julian Sawyer, private investigator. He specializes in financial fraud, asset tracing, that sort of thing. He's worked with me on a few cases over the years. Discreet, thorough. If Preston's up to something, Julian will find it. I picked up the card. Plain white, black text. Julian Sawyer Investigations. Why, you think Preston's trying to steal the farm? Helena's face darkened. Calvin, I've seen this pattern before. And it never ends with just a chair. The weight of those words settled over me like a blanket. I'll also recommend we do a few things proactively, Helena continued. Update your will. Make sure your medical and financial power of attorney documents are ironclad. Get a cognitive assessment on record so no one can claim you're incapacitated. Incapacitated. The word felt absurd. If Preston's trying to gain control of your assets, the easiest path is through Trevor, especially if he can argue you're no longer capable of managing your own affairs. My stomach turned. Call Julian, Helena said. Today. Tell him I sent you. He'll want to meet in person, ask some questions. After that, he'll start digging. I stared at the card in my hand. Calvin. Helena's voice softened. I know this is hard, but you need to protect yourself. And you need to protect that farm. I nodded. I will. She walked me to the door. As I stepped into the hallway, she called after me. Calvin. I turned. Whatever's happening, she said, it's not about a chair. Don't forget that. I took the stairs back down slower this time, my mind spinning. By the time I reached my truck, I'd already pulled out my phone. 3 days later, Julian called. What he'd found would change everything. The knock at the kitchen door came at 10 sharp. I'd been up since dawn, moving through my usual routine, feeding the barn cats, checking equipment in the shed, walking the fence along the south pasture. Anything to keep my hands busy and my thoughts from spiraling. When the knock came, I was halfway through my second cup of coffee, staring at a stack of unpaid bills on the counter. I opened the door. Julian Sawyer stood on the porch with a leather messenger bag slung over one shoulder. He wore a wool coat and wire-rimmed glasses that made him look more like a professor than a private investigator. Late 50s, close-cropped gray hair, calm eyes that suggested he'd spent years listening while others talked too much. Mr. Barlow, he said, extending his hand. Julian Sawyer. Helena Crawford asked me to stop by. I shook his hand. Firm, steady. Come in, coffee? Black, he said. I poured him a cup and motioned to the kitchen table. He set his bag down, pulled out a slim folder, and opened it without wasting time. I've spent the last 3 days looking into Preston Pemberton, Julian said. And what I found isn't good. I sat across from him, Go on. He slid a printed page toward me. Iowa Insurance Division licensee search results. Preston Pemberton, Julian said. Former investment advisor. Licensed from 1995 to 2018. His license was revoked in March of that year. Revoked for what? The filing doesn't say. But licenses don't get revoked over clerical errors. It's usually fraud or mishandling client funds. He tapped the page. 2 civil lawsuits were filed around the same time. Both settled, records sealed. So we don't know what happened. Not officially. But sealed settlements usually mean someone paid to make trouble disappear. He slid another document across. A property record. Preston and his wife live in an $800,000 house. Gated community. Golf course. But he hasn't reported income since 2019. No salary. No consulting fees. Then how's he paying for it? Julian leaned back. Either he isn't or the money's off the books. My stomach tightened. He wasn't done. Another page appeared, this one with Trevor's name. Your son took out 2 business loans. $230,000 in 2019. $620,000 in 2022. Both failed. Total outstanding debt, $850,000. The number knocked the air out of me. He's been making minimum payments, Julian continued. Barely staying afloat. I thought about Trevor's house. The renovations. The new furniture. What about Natalie, I asked. Does she work? No employment records. Listed as a homemaker. So how are they living? Julian folded his hands. Trevor's salary covers maybe 60% of their expenses. The rest is coming from somewhere. My guess is Preston. The picture was forming, and I didn't like it. There's more, Julian said. His voice dropped. Someone's been asking about your farm. I stiffened. Who? I can't confirm yet. But the question started about 6 months ago. How much land you own, whether you'd sell, how your health is, 6 months. Right when Trevor began pulling away, Julian closed the folder. I spent 25 years with the FBI and 15 doing this privately. I've seen this pattern. Someone targets a valuable asset. They work through family. They isolate the owner. They plant doubt about capacity. Then they move. You think Preston's after my farm. I think he sees opportunity. And I think Trevor's caught in the middle. I rubbed my face, fatigue settling deep. Julian pulled out one final sheet. A name and an address. Fiona Garrett, Nebraska. Widow. Lost over $3 million working with Preston 12 years ago. I haven't spoken to her yet, but I plan to. Another victim. What do? I asked. First, protect yourself, he said. Get a cognitive assessment. If anyone challenges your capacity, we need proof. You think they would? If desperation sets in, yes. I nodded. I'll do it. Good. Julian stood and packed his bag. I'll keep digging and contact Fiona. He handed me his card. Call if anything changes. If Trevor calls. If Preston shows up. I walked him to the door. He paused, looking over the fields. Nice land, he said. Worth fighting for. After he left, I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the papers spread across the table. Preston Pemberton. Unlicensed. Broke. Hiding something. Trevor. Drowning in debt. And me. The target! But first I had to prove I wasn't the confused old man they wanted me to be. The exam room was small and familiar, white walls, the faint smell of antiseptic, a blood pressure poster taped to the door. I'd been coming to this clinic for 20 years, ever since Dr. Bradford took over from old Doc Henley. Same vinyl chair. Same paper-covered exam table that crinkled whenever you shifted. I sat on the table, rolling up my sleeve as Dr. Amelia Bradford wrapped the cuff around my arm. Deep breath, Calvin, she said. Calm. Steady. She was in her 50s. Auburn hair streaked with gray, the kind of doctor who'd spent decades dealing with stubborn farmers who avoided clinics until something broke. The cuff tightened, then released with a soft hiss. 128/82, she said, writing it down. Right where it should be. Good to know I'm not falling apart. She smiled, Far from it. She checked my lungs clear. My heart strong, steady. Reflexes. Grip strength. A straight walk across the room. Every result the same normal. Healthy. Better than most men my age. You're in good shape, Calvin, she said. Better than a lot of 60-year-olds I see. I keep busy. She set the clipboard aside and pulled up a stool so we were eye to eye. Helena Crawford called yesterday. She said you wanted a cognitive assessment on record. I nodded. She didn't ask why. In a town this small, she didn't need to. Rumors moved faster than harvest trucks. And by now, Thanksgiving dinner at Trevor's place had become public knowledge, twisted and retold at feed stores and coffee counters. People smiled to your face, then quietly decided what kind of man you were. All right, she said. We'll do a mini mental state exam. Simple questions. Memory, attention, reasoning. Let's do it. She asked the date, the day, the location. I answered without hesitation. Wednesday, November 27th. Dr. Bradford's clinic downtown. Good. Remember 3 words, she said. Apple, table, penny. I repeated them back. She had me count backward from 100 by 7s. 72 before she stopped me. Spell world backward. DLROW. She nodded. Now a practical one. Your farm brings in $280,000 in a good year. Property taxes are $12,000. Equipment and maintenance $40,000. Seed fertilizer labor $70,000. What's your net? $158,000. And if you set aside 20%, $126,000. She smiled. Most people can't do that in their heads. Most people don't run farms. She made a final note. Do you remember the 3 words? Apple, table, penny? She leaned back. Calvin, you're sharper than most 50-year-olds. No signs of cognitive decline. None. I felt the tension drain from my shoulders. I'll have the report ready tomorrow, she said. Helena can use it if needed. But for what it's worth, you're fully capable. Thank you, Amelia. She helped me down from the table. Whatever's going on with Trevor, don't let anyone tell you you're unfit. You've got more sense than most people I know. Outside, the sun was sinking low. I sat in my truck, hands on the wheel, staring ahead, letting the quiet settle. Helena had warned me this might come to paperwork and courts, to strangers deciding what kind of man I was based on documents instead of dirt under my nails. The report would help. Helena was gathering 5 years of farm ledgers, tax returns, profit and loss statements. Together they made a solid defense against anyone claiming I couldn't manage my affairs. But defense wasn't enough. I needed to know what Preston was after. My phone buzzed. I expected Helena. Instead, Julian's name lit the screen. Need to talk. Tonight. Urgent, I called back. He answered immediately. Calvin, he said, voice tight. We need to meet. Now. What is it? Not over the phone. Can you come to the farm? I'm 20 minutes out. I'm in town. I'll be there in 30. Good, he said. Because what I found, it's not just about Preston. It's about the land beneath your feet. The line went dead. I stared at the phone. The land beneath my feet. I took one last breath, steadying myself for whatever waited ahead. I turned the key. The engine roared to life and the road home stretched. They were already waiting when I pulled into the driveway. Julian's sedan sat next to Helena's silver Buick, both parked near the porch. Through the kitchen window, I could see shadows moving inside. I'd left the door unlocked, small-town habit, and they'd let themselves in. By the time I walked through the door, they'd spread documents across the coffee table in the living room. Maps, printouts, legal files. Julian stood by the window, arms crossed, his expression grim. Helena sat on the couch, reading glasses perched on her nose, flipping through a thick binder. Calvin, Julian turned. We need to talk, now. I shrugged off my coat and tossed it over a chair. I'm listening. Helena gestured to the armchair across from her. Sit. This is going to take a minute. I sat. Julian moved to the coffee table and picked up a geological survey map, the kind with colored layers showing underground formations. He unfolded it and pointed to a section highlighted in yellow. Like your farm, he said. 380 acres. You already know that. But what you don't know is what's underneath it. I leaned forward, studying the map. The yellow section covered my entire property, south pasture, north fields, the timber along the creek. Every inch of it. This is the Bakken Shale Formation, Julian continued. It runs through parts of North Dakota, Montana, and here northwest Iowa. It's one of the richest oil and natural gas deposits in the country. I stared at him. Oil on my land. Not just oil. Mineral rights. He pulled out another document, a geological report stamped with a company logo I didn't recognize. This survey was commissioned 3 months ago by a geologist named Dr. Brian Lockwood. And guess who hired him? Preston. Bingo! Julian tapped the report. Lockwood's findings estimate the mineral rights beneath your property are worth between $45 and $60 million. The number hung in the air like a thunderclap. I couldn't breathe. 45 to 60 million! My voice came out hoarse. Helena looked up from her binder. Calvin, do you own the mineral rights to your land? I tried to think. My grandfather bought this farm in 1952. He owned it outright. My father inherited it. Then me. So, yes. I think so. Good. Helena made a note. That means if someone wanted to extract oil or gas, they'd need your permission, or they'd need to control you. Julian pulled out another page. Apex Energy Corporation. They're a mid-sized oil and gas company based in Oklahoma. Over the last 3 months, they've been in talks with Preston Pemberton. 4 meetings, all documented. What kind of talks? Lease negotiations. Apex wants to lease the mineral rights to your land. Their offer, $8 to $10 million upfront, plus 15 to 18% royalties on everything they extract. I did the math in my head. Even on the low end, that was generational wealth. Money that could secure Miles's future. Trevor's future. Hell, the future of every Barlow for the next 100 years. But there's a problem, Julian said. Preston doesn't own your land, you do. So he can't make the deal. Unless he controls me, I finished. Exactly. Helena flipped open her binder and pulled out a legal document. This is a petition for conservatorship. If someone can prove you're incapacitated mentally or physically, they can ask the court to appoint a conservator to manage your affairs. And if Trevor's named conservator, he'd have the legal authority to lease those mineral rights. And Preston controls Trevor. Precisely. Julian set down the report and looked at me. Calvin Preston Pemberton is broke. Worse than broke. He filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy 8 months ago. He owes $8.2 million to creditors, and his house is about to be foreclosed on. He's desperate, and desperate men do dangerous things. I thought about Thanksgiving, the empty chair, Trevor's trembling hands, the way Preston had smiled when I walked away. This was never about family. It was never about respect. It was about $60 million. There's more, Julian said quietly. He pulled out a thin file and slid it across the table. Her name is Fiona Garrett. 12 years ago, she inherited $3.2 million from her late husband. Preston was her investment advisor. He convinced her to invest it all in a development project farmland just like yours. 6 months later, the company dissolved. The money vanished. She sued but couldn't prove fraud. Preston walked away clean. And now he's doing it again. Same playbook, different target. Julian's jaw tightened. Preston finds vulnerable people, widows, elderly clients, family members. He gains their trust. And then he takes everything. Helena closed her binder and looked at me. Calvin, if Trevor gets conservatorship, Preston gets access to those mineral rights. He'll lease them to Apex, take the upfront payment, and disappear before anyone realizes what happened. Trevor will be left holding the bag, and you'll lose everything. I sat back trying to process it all. Trevor didn't know. He couldn't. My son wasn't a criminal. He wasn't a fraud. He was a good man who'd gotten in over his head, who'd trusted the wrong person, and Preston had used that trust like a weapon. What do? I asked. Helena leaned forward. First, we protect the mineral rights. I'll file a declaration with the county recorder's office making it clear you have no intention of selling or leasing. That'll create a paper trail. Gentle, Julian added. We need to tell Trevor. He deserves to know what's happening, what Preston's really after. I thought about my son, the way he'd looked at me that night, the pain in his eyes. He won't believe me, I said. Preston's got him convinced I'm losing my mind. So then we show him the evidence, Helena said. The geological survey, the bankruptcy filing, Fiona Garrett's case, we lay it all out, and we hope he's smart enough to see the truth. Julian pulled out his phone and checked the screen. There's a diner about 30 miles from here. Neutral ground. Quiet. I can have everything ready by Saturday night. Saturday. 2 days away. I nodded slowly. All right, I'll call him. Helena stood gathering her documents. Calvin, this won't be easy. Trevor's been under Preston's influence for a long time. He might not want to hear it. I know. Julian handed me a USB drive. Everything's on here. Geological survey, bankruptcy records, Apex correspondence, Fiona's case. If Trevor asks for proof, you'll have it. I took the drive and slipped it into my pocket. After they left, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the maps spread across the coffee table. $45 to $60 million. Buried under soil my great-grandfather had broken with a plow. Hidden beneath fields I'd walked 1,000 times. Preston had known. For months he'd known. And he'd been circling, waiting for the right moment to strike. But he'd made one mistake. He'd underestimated me. I pulled out my phone and stared at Trevor's name in my contacts. The hardest conversation of my life was 2 days away. The diner sat 30 miles outside of town, tucked between a grain elevator and a shuttered gas station on Highway 20. The kind of place truckers stopped for coffee at 3 in the morning, where the pie was decent and nobody asked questions. I'd gotten there early, claimed a booth in the back corner, and ordered coffee I didn't drink. Through the window, I watched headlights sweep across the gravel parking lot. Trevor's SUV pulled in just after 8. He sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, hands on the wheel, staring at the diner's neon sign. Finally, he climbed out and walked toward the door. He looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes. Unshaven. His jacket hung loose like he'd lost weight. When he stepped inside, he scanned the room until he found me, then made his way to the booth without a word. He slid into the seat across from me. Dad. Trevor. The waitress appeared with a pot of coffee. Trevor nodded, and she filled his cup before disappearing back behind the counter. We sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the fluorescent lights filling the space between us. Thanks for coming, I said. Trevor wrapped his hands around the cup. You said it was important. It is. He looked up, and for the first time in 3 years, I saw my son. Not the man who'd pushed me away at Thanksgiving. Not the stranger who'd been pulling back for months. Just Trevor. Exhausted, scared, lost. Are you happy, son? I asked. He blinked, caught off guard. What? I'm not here to fight. I'm not here to guilt you. I just want to know, are you happy? Trevor's jaw tightened. He looked down at his coffee, his fingers trembling slightly around the cup. No, he said quietly. I'm not. I nodded. Tell me what's going on. It came out slowly at first, then all at once. The debt, $850,000 from 2 business ventures that had collapsed. The constant pressure from Natalie to keep up appearances, to live in the right neighborhood, to drive the right car. Preston stepping in, offering advice, offering money, offering a way out. He said you were struggling. Trevor said, his voice cracking. That the farm was failing. That you were getting confused, forgetting things. He said I needed to step in before you lost everything. And you believed him. Trevor looked up, his eyes red. He's my father-in-law. Why wouldn't I? I reached into the messenger bag I'd brought and pulled out the USB drive. I slid it across the table along with a manila folder. Because he's lying to you, I said. And I can prove it. Trevor stared at the folder but didn't open it. Inside that folder, I continued. You'll find Preston's bankruptcy filing. Chapter 11. He owes $8.2 million. His house is about to be foreclosed. He's broke, Trevor. Worse than broke. Trevor opened the folder with shaking hands. His eyes scanned the first page, a legal document stamped with a court seal. His face went pale. This can't be right. It's right. I pulled out another document. This is a geological survey of my farm. Did you know there's oil under my land mineral rights worth $45 to $60 million? Trevor's head snapped up. What? Apex Energy wants to lease it. 8 to 10 million upfront plus royalties. Preston's been negotiating with them for months. 4 meetings. All documented. I slid the Apex correspondence across the table. But he can't lease those rights, I said. Because I own them. Unless someone takes control of my farm. Someone like you. Trevor stared at the papers, his breathing shallow. There's more. I pulled out a thin file. Fiona Garrett. 12 years ago, Preston was her investment advisor. She inherited $3.2 million. He convinced her to invest it all. 6 months later, it was gone. She sued him but couldn't prove fraud. He walked away clean. Dad, I didn't. I know you didn't. I leaned forward. Preston's been planning this for months. He found you when you were vulnerable. He offered help. He made himself indispensable. And then he started isolating you from me. Trevor's hands were shaking. He said you were losing your mind. I pulled out the final document, Dr. Bradford's medical report. Shakti, this is from 3 days ago. Full cognitive assessment. Blood pressure reflexes, memory tests, problem solving. Dr. Bradford says I'm sharper than most 50-year-olds she sees. Trevor read the report, his face crumbling. And these, I said, pulling out 5 years of farm ledgers, are the books. 250 to 280,000 in profit every year. The farm isn't failing. It's thriving. Trevor set down the papers and covered his face with his hands. He lied to me, he whispered. He's been lying the whole time. Yes, and I believed him. Trevor looked up, the tears streaming down his face. I pushed you away. At Thanksgiving. In front of everyone. Trevor. I reached across the table and gripped his shoulder. You didn't know. He manipulated you. That's what he does. What do I do? Trevor's voice was raw. What do I do now? I leaned back, choosing my words carefully. Help me stop him, I said. Before he destroys both of us. Trevor wiped his eyes. How? Preston thinks he's won. He thinks you're on his side. So we let him keep thinking that. You want me to lie to him? I want you to protect yourself. And your family. I paused. Can you do that? Trevor was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. What about Natalie? He asked. You can't tell her. Not yet. If Natalie knows, Preston will know. Trevor flinched, but he nodded again. Okay. Good. I pulled out Julian's card. This is Julian Sawyer. He's a private investigator. He's been helping me. Tomorrow I want you to meet with him. He'll set you up with a recording device, something small, discreet. You want me to record Preston? I want evidence, real evidence. If Preston incriminates himself, if he admits what he's trying to do, we can stop him. Trevor stared at the card, then slipped it into his pocket. I'm sorry, Dad, he said, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I know. We sat there for a moment, the weight of everything settling between us. Then Trevor stood. I stood with him. And for the first time in 3 years, I pulled my son into a hug. He held on tight, his shoulders shaking. We're going to fix this, I said quietly. Together. When we left the diner, the night air was cold and sharp. Trevor walked to his SUV, paused, and looked back at me. Dad? Yeah. Thank you for not giving up on me. I nodded. Never. He climbed into his SUV and drove away, taillights disappearing into the dark. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty highway. The war had just begun. But for the first time since Thanksgiving, I wasn't fighting it alone. 3 days later, the first move came from Preston. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Wooden benches, a judge's bench at the front, an American flag in the corner. And it was packed. Preston sat at the left table, flanked by a lawyer in an expensive suit. Lorraine sat behind him, hands folded. Natalie was there, 2 pale eyes on the floor, and Trevor sitting alone in the back row, shoulders hunched. When I walked in with Helena, he glanced up for a fraction of a second, then looked away, playing his part. All rise! Judge Patricia Holloway entered, silver hair, sharp eyes that swept the room like she could see through walls. She took her seat, and we followed. This is a petition for conservatorship filed by Preston Pemberton on behalf of Trevor Barlow. She looked at Preston's lawyer. Attorney Langford, proceed. Roger Langford stood tall, polished, confident. Your Honor, this petition is filed out of concern. Calvin Barlow is 68 lives alone on a farm. His son has observed troubling behavior, erratic decisions, confusion. On Thanksgiving, Mr. Barlow became agitated during a family dinner and left abruptly. We believe he may be suffering from cognitive decline and is no longer capable of managing his affairs. Judge Holloway looked at me. Mr. Barlow, how do you respond? Helena stood. Your Honor, my client categorically denies these allegations. Calvin Barlow is in excellent health. We have documentation to prove it. She handed the bailiff a file. This is a medical evaluation by Dr. Amelia Bradford, Mr. Barlow's physician of 20 years. Cognitive testing, physical exam, full capacity assessment. Dr. Bradford states that Calvin Barlow's cognitive function exceeds that of the average person his age. The judge read in silence. Helena continued. These are Mr. Barlow's financial records for 5 years. The farm has been consistently profitable, $250,000 to $280,000 annually. Every payment on time, every tax filed correctly. She pulled out another document. We've also prepared video depositions from Pastor Joseph Covington, Vernon Hutchins of the local feed store, and Martha Callahan, president of the agricultural co-op. All attest to Mr. Barlow's sound judgment and sharp mind. Judge Holloway nodded. I'll review the depositions. She looked at Trevor. Mr. Trevor Barlow, please stand. Trevor rose slowly, face drawn. Preston turned, watching him. Mr. Barlow, you filed this petition. Do you truly believe your father is incapacitated? The courtroom went silent. Trevor hesitated. Your Honor, I've been concerned. There have been moments where I wondered, but... He glanced at me just for a second. I respect the medical evidence, and I know my father is capable. Langford's face tightened. Judge Holloway leaned forward. So you're not certain your father lacks capacity? Trevor swallowed. I trust the doctors, Your Honor. The judge sat back and flipped through the medical report one more time. Then she closed the folder with a decisive snap. I've seen enough. The medical evidence is clear. The financial records are impeccable. The community testimony is consistent. There is no basis for conservatorship. She looked at Langford. Petition denied. The gavel came down. Relief flooded through me. Helena squeezed my shoulder. You're good, Calvin. Across the aisle, Preston's face had gone dark. He stood abruptly, whispered something to Langford, then walked out without a word. Natalie followed, head down. Lorraine lingered, glanced at Trevor, then left. Trevor stayed where he was, staring at the floor. Outside the courthouse, Helena and I descended the steps. I was about to thank her when I heard raised voices behind us. I turned. Preston had Trevor by the arm near the building's corner, pulling him aside. Miles stood a few feet away, watching his face tight with worry. I couldn't hear what Preston was saying, but I saw Trevor's face pale. Saw Preston lean in, voice low and urgent. Then Preston let go and walked away, disappearing into the parking lot. Trevor stood there frozen. Miles approached his father, said something I couldn't hear. Trevor shook his head, put a hand on his son's shoulder, and they walked toward their car. Helena touched my arm. Calvin, whatever Preston just said, I know. I didn't know what Plan B was, but I'd find out soon enough. That night my phone rang. Trevor's name lit up the screen. I answered. Dad. His voice was shaking. We need to talk. Now. Dad, listen to me. Preston knows something's wrong. I gripped the phone tighter, my heart pounding. What happened? Trevor's breath came in short bursts like he'd been running. After the hearing, he pulled me aside, told me I'd made a mistake, that I'd disrespected him in front of the judge. Then he said, Trevor's voice dropped. He said Plan B starts tonight. Plan B. He called an emergency meeting at my house, 20 minutes after we left the courthouse. Trevor paused. Dad, I recorded it. My blood went cold. What did he say? Hold on, I'm sending it now. My phone buzzed. A voice memo appeared. I tapped it. Preston's voice filled my kitchen, smooth and controlled. The old man's tougher than I thought. We need to speed this up. Another voice, younger, rougher. What do you want me to do? Not tractor accident. Cut the brake line on the John Deere. Make it look natural. He checks the south field every Wednesday morning. That gives us tomorrow night. And if something goes wrong, nothing goes wrong. You're a mechanic, Brett. You know tractors. Just make sure it looks like equipment failure. What's the pay? $5,000. Cash. Half now, half when it's done. The recording ended. I stood there staring at the phone, my hands shaking. They were planning to tamper with my tractor, to make me crash, to make it look like an accident. Dad. Trevor's voice pulled me back. Are you there? I'm here. My voice came out rough. Who's Brett? Brett Coleman. He's a mechanic. Does side work for some of Preston's contacts. I didn't know he'd be here. Preston just showed up with him. Where were you when they said this? Upstairs. I heard them come in, so I opened the voice recorder app on my phone and left it on the desk in my office. They were right below me. Smart kid. Trevor, you need to get out of that house. I can't. Natalie's asleep upstairs. If I leave now, she'll ask questions. He was right. If Natalie knew, Preston would know. All right, stay put, lock your door. I'm calling Helena. Dad, stay put. I hung up and dialed Helena. She answered on the second ring voice alert despite the late hour. Calvin, what's wrong? I played her the recording. When it finished, there was a long silence. Calvin, this is attempted murder. I know. We need to call the police now. I'm calling Sheriff Bennett next. Good. I'll draft an emergency restraining order. We can have it by morning. She paused. Calvin, don't go near that tractor. Don't go anywhere alone until Brett Coleman's in custody. I won't. I hung up and called Sheriff Wade Bennett. He answered on the fourth ring, sounding half asleep. Calvin, it's 9 at night. What? No, Wade, I need you to listen to something. I played the recording again. By the time it finished, Wade was wide awake. Jesus, Calvin. That's conspiracy. Attempted harm. Who's Brett Coleman? Mechanic, 30-something, works around town. I know him. Small time. Does repo work side jobs. Didn't think he'd go this far. Wade's voice hardened. All right. I'm calling 2 deputies. We'll pick him up tonight. What about Preston? We'll bring him in for questioning. But without physical evidence, without Brett actually doing something, it's going to be hard to make charges stick. Recording's good, but a defense lawyer could argue it was hypothetical. So what do we do? Wade was quiet for a moment. Option 1, we arrest Brett now before he can touch your equipment. Safe, but weaker case. Option 2, we let him make the move, catch him in the act. Set up surveillance in your barn, catch him on camera, tampering with the tractor. Stronger case, but riskier. No. My voice was flat. I'm not letting some hired thug loose in my barn. Arrest him tonight. You sure? I'm sure. All right. We'll move on Brett within the hour. I'll station a deputy at your farm overnight just in case. Thanks, Wade. Calvin, one more thing. If we're going after Preston, we need more than this recording. We need him to incriminate himself on tape. Clearly, undeniably, I knew what he was saying. You want Trevor to wear a wire? It's the best shot we've got. I thought about my son walking into Preston's house with a recording device strapped to his chest. One wrong move, one suspicious word, and Preston would know. But Wade was right. Without more evidence, Preston could claim the recording was taken out of context. That he was joking. That Brett acted on his own. We needed Preston to confess, on tape, in his own words. I called Trevor back. Dad, Trevor Sheriff Bennett's arresting Brett tonight. You're safe. But we need more. More what? We need Preston to admit what he's doing, on tape. And we need you to get it. Silence. You want me to wear a wire? Cousin Julian can set it up. Small device hidden. You meet with Preston tomorrow, act like everything's normal. Get him talking. Get him to admit he's trying to take the farm. Dad, if he finds out, he won't. Julian's good. The equipment's professional grade. Preston won't suspect anything. Trevor's breath was shaky. What if he does? Then you walk away. You don't push. You stay safe. Another long silence. All right, Trevor said finally. I'll do it. You sure? No, but I'll do it anyway. I closed my eyes, a weight settling over me. Tomorrow morning my son would walk into the lion's den, and I couldn't protect him. Trevor. Yeah, be careful. I will. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table staring at my phone. Outside, a deputy's cruiser pulled into the driveway, lights off, parking near the barn. Wade had kept his word. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Trevor. Julian's sedan pulled into the driveway just after dawn. I was already awake, had been for hours, standing at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee I hadn't touched. The sky was gray, the air cold, and the barn sat dark and silent under the deputy's watchful eye. Julian climbed out carrying a small black case. Trevor's truck pulled in behind him. I met them at the door. Trevor looked like he hadn't slept either. Pale, hollow-eyed, but steady. Morning, Julian said quietly. He stepped inside, set the case on the kitchen table, and opened it. Inside was a device smaller than a pack of cards, with a thin wire and a tiny microphone. This is a digital transmitter, Julian explained. Voice-activated, range of about 200 yards. It'll record everything and transmit it to a receiver I'll have parked outside Preston's office. Trevor stared at the device. That's it. That's it. Julian pulled it out and attached a strip of medical tape to the back. We'll place it here. He tapped his own chest just below the collarbone. Under your shirt. It'll pick up your voice and anyone within 6 feet of you. Trevor nodded, though his hands were shaking. Julian looked at me. Calvin, can you give us a minute? I stepped into the hallway. Through the door, I heard the rustle of fabric, Julian's low instructions, Trevor's nervous breathing. A few minutes later, Julian called me back in. Trevor stood by the table, his shirt buttoned, the device invisible beneath the fabric. He looked the same as always. You'd never know. Say something, Julian said. I'm testing. Trevor's voice was quiet. Julian checked a handheld receiver, nodded. Crystal clear. He handed Trevor a small card. If you feel unsafe at any point, if Preston gets suspicious, if anything goes wrong, you say this phrase, I need to call Natalie. That's the abort signal. You walk out and we pull you. Trevor slipped the card into his pocket. I stepped forward and pulled my son into a hug. Held him tight for a moment. Be careful, I said. I will. And then he was gone. 9:30 a.m., Preston's office. I wasn't there, but Trevor told me everything afterward, and we had the recording. Preston's office was in a small suburban complex, second-floor corner unit, with a view of a parking lot and a Starbucks. Trevor walked in just after 9:30. Preston was sitting behind his desk, reading something on his computer. He looked up when Trevor entered, his expression unreadable. Trevor, close the door. Trevor did. Sit. Trevor sat. Preston leaned back in his chair, studying him. You made me look like a fool yesterday. I'm sorry. The judge asked me a direct question. I couldn't lie under oath. Preston's jaw tightened. You could have been more convincing. Trevor shifted in his seat. Dad's suspicious now. He knows something's up. We need to move faster. Preston's expression softened slightly. Brett's handling the tractor tonight. By tomorrow morning, this will be over. What if it doesn't work? It'll work. Brett knows tractors. One cut in the right place and it'll look like 50-year-old equipment finally gave out. Trevor swallowed. And if Dad survives, Preston smiled, cold and thin. He won't. The words hung in the air. Trevor pressed on. What happens after? Preston stood and walked to the window. After you inherit. You petition for conservatorship of the estate, purely procedural since you're the sole heir. And then we lease the mineral rights. To Apex. And to Apex. 10 million up front. 15% royalties. The land's worth 60 million in total, but we don't need all of it. Just enough. Enough for what? Preston turned. I owe $8.2 million, Trevor. Creditors are circling. My house is 2 months from foreclosure. This deal saves me, and it sets you up for life. 10 million split 2 ways, 5 for me, 5 for you. Your debts disappear. You keep the house. Natalie's happy. Everyone wins. Except my father. Preston shrugged. Your father's had 70 good years. He's lived his life. Now it's your turn. Trevor's voice was tight. What about Fiona Garrett? Preston laughed, actually laughed. Ancient history. She couldn't prove anything then, and she can't prove anything now. That woman's been chasing ghosts for 12 years. And Brett, what happens to him? Brett's an idiot, but he's loyal. And cheap. $5,000 and he'll do whatever I ask. If something goes wrong, he takes the fall. Not us. Trevor leaned forward. What if Dad doesn't? What if the tractor thing doesn't work? Preston's smile returned. Then we sue the equipment manufacturer. Faulty brakes, negligence. Your father's gone and you inherit faster. Either way, Trevor, you win. Trevor sat back, his face pale. And then from the hallway came the sound of boots on tile. The door burst open. Sheriff Wade Bennett stepped in, flanked by 3 deputies. His hand rested on his belt near his weapon. Preston Pemberton, stand up, hands where I can see them. Preston's face went white. What the? You're under arrest for conspiracy to cause harm, fraud, attempted sabotage, and financial exploitation. Wade pulled out handcuffs. Turn around. Preston stared at Trevor, and the realization hit him like a freight train. You recorded me. His voice was a snarl. You little... Turn around, now! Preston complied, shaking with rage. Wade cuffed him, read him his rights. Brett Coleman was arrested an hour ago, Wade said. Caught in Calvin Barlow's barn with tools and a cut brake line in his hand. He's already talking. Gave you up in about 10 minutes. Preston said nothing. Wade led him toward the door. As they passed, Trevor Preston leaned in, his voice venomous. You just destroyed your family. Trevor didn't flinch. No, I saved it. Outside the building, I was waiting by Julian's car. I saw them bring Preston out in cuffs, saw the fury on his face. saw Trevor walk out behind them pale but standing tall. I met him halfway across the parking lot, pulled him into another hug. "You did it," I said. "Yeah," his voice was shaky. "I did. If you're still here with me, I want to hear from you. Share your thoughts or your predictions in the comments. Let me know what you think about everything that just happened, so I know you're still watching. And based on what you've heard so far, rate this video from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps me make these stories even better. And just a quick note before we continue, the next part of this story includes fictional elements created for storytelling and learning purposes. If this isn't for you, you're free to stop watching here. Julian removed the wire, slipped it back into the case. "Clean recording, every word. That's enough for the DA to file charges." My phone buzzed. "Helena, recording is admissible, we've got him." But Trevor's phone was buzzing too. 20 missed calls. All from Natalie. "I have to go home," Trevor said quietly. "She's going to ask questions." "Tell her the truth," I said. "I don't think she'll believe me." That afternoon, Natalie called Trevor, and everything got worse. The front door was already open when Trevor pulled into the driveway. He sat in his truck for a moment, hands on the wheel, staring at the house. Through the window, he could see movement boxes being carried, drawers being emptied. His stomach turned. He climbed out and walked inside. Natalie stood in the living room, arms crossed her face, red and tear-streaked. Lorraine was beside her, folding clothes into a suitcase. Neither of them looked up when he entered. "Natalie, don't!" Her voice was sharp, trembling. "Don't say a word!" Trevor stopped in the doorway. "Let me explain." "Explain." Natalie's voice cracked. "You had my father arrested, in front of everyone. How could you betray him like that? He wasn't who you thought he was. He's my father, Trevor, and he was trying to have mine hurt. Or worse." Natalie stared at him, her chest heaving. "You're lying." Trevor pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and played the recording. Preston's voice filled the room. "Brett's handling the tractor tonight. One cut in the right place and it'll look like equipment failure." Natalie flinched but didn't move. "Your father's had 70 good years. Now it's your turn." Trevor stopped the recording. "That's your father, planning to sabotage my dad's tractor, to make it look like an accident. That doesn't prove anything," Natalie said, but her voice was weaker now. Trevor pulled out a printed document and set it on the coffee table. "This is your father's bankruptcy filing, Chapter 11. He owes $8.2 million. His house is being foreclosed." Natalie stared at the paper but didn't touch it. "This," Trevor continued, pulling out another file, "is the Fiona Garrett case, 2012. Your father defrauded her out of $3.2 million. She sued him. He settled to make it go away." "Stop." "And this," Trevor said, his voice steady, "is a geological survey. My dad's farm sits on mineral rights worth $60 million. Your father's been negotiating with an oil company for months. He was going to use me to take control of the farm and lease those rights." Natalie's hands were shaking. She looked at Lorraine, who stood silent, her face pale. "Mom," Natalie said, "tell him he's wrong." Lorraine didn't speak. She just folded another shirt, her movements slow and mechanical. "Mom," Lorraine finally looked up. Her voice was quiet. "I don't know what your father's been doing, Natalie, but I'm not going to defend him right now." Natalie's face crumpled. "You too." Lorraine didn't answer. Natalie turned back to Trevor, her eyes blazing. "You chose your father over us, over your family." "I chose the truth," Trevor said. "The truth." Natalie's voice rose. "You destroyed my family. You humiliated my father. You—" She stopped, her voice breaking. "I want a divorce." Trevor nodded slowly. "If that's what you want, I'll fight for everything. The house, the savings, Miles." "Miles is 19. Trevor said quietly. He makes his own choices. He's my son. He's our son. A voice came from the stairs. I'm staying with Dad. They both turned. Miles stood on the landing, his hands in his pockets, his face set. Miles, Natalie started. I heard everything, Mom. Miles descended the stairs, his eyes on his mother. I heard the recording. I saw the documents. Grandpa Preston tried to hurt Grandpa Calvin, and Dad stopped him. You don't understand. I understand enough. Miles crossed the room and stood beside his father. I'm staying with Dad and Grandpa. Natalie's face went white. She looked at Lorraine, who was still folding clothes, then back at Miles. Fine, she said, her voice cold. Fine. She grabbed her purse and walked toward the door. Lorraine picked up the suitcase and followed. At the threshold, Natalie turned back. You'll regret this, Trevor. Maybe, Trevor said. But at least I can live with myself. The door slammed shut. Trevor and Miles stood in the silent living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes. You okay, Dad? Miles asked. Trevor nodded, though his hands were still shaking. Yeah, I think so. Miles put a hand on his father's shoulder. We'll be okay. That evening my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. I'm Mr. Barlow. A woman's voice, professional, clipped. This is Eleanor Walsh. I'm an investigator with the prosecutor's office working with Amanda Foster. What can I do for you? We're building a case against Preston Pemberton. And based on what we've uncovered, this isn't an isolated incident. Preston has a pattern. He's done this before. I leaned forward. How many times? We've identified at least 3 prior victims. One in 1998, one in 2005, and one in 2012. Fiona Garrett. Yes. Eleanor paused. She's been collecting evidence for 12 years, waiting for someone to take Preston seriously. I spoke with her this afternoon. She's willing to testify. My chest tightened. Where is she? Lincoln, Nebraska. About 4 hours from you. I looked out the window. The sun was setting the fields, turning gold in the fading light. Can you give me her contact information? I can do better than that, Eleanor said. I'll arrange a meeting. Tomorrow, if you're available. I'll be there. Good. I'll text you the address. She paused. Mr. Barlow, Fiona's story is difficult. What Preston did to her, it nearly destroyed her. But she never gave up. And now, because of you and your son, she finally has a chance at justice. After we hung up, I called Julian. We're going to Nebraska tomorrow, I said. I'll drive, he replied. That night, I stood on the porch, looking out over the farm. 4 generations of Barlows had worked this land. And now, because of Preston's greed, it had almost been stolen. But we'd stopped him. And tomorrow we'd meet the woman Preston thought he'd destroyed. Her name was Fiona Garrett, and she'd been waiting for this moment since 2012. The highway stretched flat and endless under a gray November sky. Julian drove his hands steady on the wheel while I stared out the window at the cornfields rolling past. We'd left the farm just after 6, the sun barely up, and now 4 hours later we were crossing into Nebraska. You doing okay? Julian asked. I nodded. Just thinking. About what? About what we're going to say to her. Julian glanced at me. We tell her the truth, that Preston tried to do to you what he did to her, and that this time we stopped him. And if she doesn't believe us, she'll believe us, Julian said. She's been waiting 12 years for someone to take her seriously. Lincoln appeared on the horizon, low buildings, wide streets, the Capitol dome rising in the distance. Julian followed Eleanor's directions to a neighborhood on the east side where the houses were small and close together, the kind of place where people kept to themselves. We pulled up outside a duplex with peeling paint and a chain-link fence. The address matched. Julian killed the engine. You ready? As I'll ever be. We walked up the cracked sidewalk and knocked on the door. It opened a few inches, the chain still latched. A woman peered out, early 50s auburn hair, pulled back sharp eyes that took us in with the wariness of someone who'd learned not to trust strangers. "Fiona Garrett," I asked. "Who's asking?" "My name is Calvin Barlow. This is Julian Sawyer. Eleanor Walsh sent us." Her eyes narrowed. "The prosecutor's investigator, that's right." She studied us for a long moment, then unlatched the chain and opened the door. "Come in." The apartment was small, a kitchen, a living room, a hallway, leading to what I assumed was a bedroom. But what struck me most were the walls. Every surface was covered with boxes, files, newspaper clippings, printouts, post-it notes with dates and names, a corkboard with photos and strings connecting them like a detective's wall in a crime show. This wasn't just someone who'd been wronged. This was someone who'd spent years building a case. "Sit," she said, gesturing to a worn couch. "You want coffee?" "No, thank you." She poured herself a cup and sat in a chair across from us, arms crossed. "So, Eleanor said Preston Pemberton tried to take your farm." "He did," I said. "Or he tried to. Used my son to do it." Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition. Or maybe just exhaustion. "Tell me what happened." So I did. The Thanksgiving dinner. The conservatorship petition. The mineral rights. The sabotage plan. Trevor wearing a wire. Preston's arrest. When I finished, she set down her coffee cup and leaned back. $60 million, she said quietly. "He's gotten greedier. Eleanor said you had a case against him in 2012. Her jaw tightened. I had more than a case. I had everything. Or so I thought. She stood and walked to one of the boxes, pulled out a thick binder, and handed it to me. Inside were bank statements, contracts, emails, all meticulously organized. "My husband passed in 2011, she said. "Heart attack. He was 49. Left me $3.2 million. Life insurance savings the house. I didn't know what to do with it. I'd never handled that kind of money." She sat back down. "Preston was recommended by a friend, investment advisor, licensed, reputable. He said he specialized in farmland development, buying up rural properties, turning them into subdivisions or commercial plots. Low risk, high return. And you believed him." "I trusted him." Her voice was bitter. "I invested everything. $3.2 million. 6 months later, the company dissolved. Preston disappeared. The land deals were fake. The contracts were forgeries. I'd been cleaned out. You sued him." "I tried. But Preston's a professional. He'd covered his tracks. Shell companies, offshore accounts, falsified records. My lawyer couldn't prove fraud beyond a reasonable doubt. We settled out of court. I got nothing. And then he threatened you." Her eyes met mine. "He came to my apartment, late at night. Told me if I kept pushing, I'd lose more than money. I'd lose everything." She paused. "I believed him. But you didn't stop." "No." She gestured to the walls. "I didn't stop. I started digging, found patterns, found other victims." She pulled out another file and opened it on the coffee table. 1998. Robert Crawford. Land fraud. Preston convinced him to invest in a development project. $1.8 million. Robert never saw a dime. He died in 2003, still fighting to get his money back. "Robert Crawford," I said slowly. "Helena Crawford's father." She nodded. "Helena's your lawyer, right?" "She is." "Then she knows. She's known for years what Preston is." She flipped to another page. 2005. Martha Williams, 82 years old. Preston was her financial advisor. Convinced her to sign over power of attorney. Drained her accounts. $900,000. She died in 2010. Her estate tried to sue, but by then the money was gone. And now me. And now you. She looked at me. 4 victims, 26 years. Preston's been doing this his entire career. I stared at the files spread across the table. Why didn't anyone stop him? Because he's good. He finds people who are vulnerable widows, elderly clients, family members under pressure. He gains their trust. He takes everything, and then he disappears before anyone can prove it. Julian leaned forward. But this time we have proof. We have recordings. We have Brett Coleman. We have The Wire. Preston's going to trial. Good, she said. Because I want to testify. I looked at her. You're sure? I've been waiting 12 years for this. Her voice was steady. But I have conditions. Name them. First, I face him in court. I want Preston to see me. I want him to know I never gave up. Done. Second, I want restitution. 3.2 million plus 12 years of interest. If he has any assets left, I want them. We'll make sure the prosecutor knows. Third, she paused. I want acknowledgement, in the court record, that I tried to stop him, that I fought for 12 years, that I wasn't just a victim who walked away. You'll have it. She nodded slowly. Then she stood and walked to the window looking out at the street. When's the trial? Prosecutors still building the case, Julian said. Probably a few weeks. I'll need a place to stay, near the courthouse. We'll arrange it, I said. Eleanor can help. She turned back to us. All right, I'm in. That evening, I helped her pack a suitcase. She didn't have much clothes files, the evidence boxes she'd been carrying for 12 years. Julian called Eleanor, who arranged a motel in Des Moines, close to the courthouse. As we loaded the car, she looked back at the duplex one last time. 12 years, she said quietly. I've been living in that apartment waiting. And now it's finally happening. You're brave, I said. No, she shook her head. I'm just tired of running. We drove back in silence, the sun setting behind us. By the time we reached Des Moines, it was dark. We dropped her at the motel, made sure she had everything she needed, and then Julian and I headed back to the farm. When I left Nebraska, I wasn't alone anymore. But whether she'd stand firm when it mattered most, only time would tell. 2 weeks after we left Nebraska, I sat in a conference room at the prosecutor's office. Amanda Foster stood at the head of the table, a stack of files in front of her, a whiteboard behind her covered with names and dates. She was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense. Trevor and I sat on one side, Helena and Julian on the other. Eleanor Walsh stood near the whiteboard, laptop open. Let's talk about what we have, Amanda said. Preston Pemberton is facing 4 criminal charges: conspiracy to cause serious harm, fraud, financial exploitation, and elder abuse. If convicted, he's looking at 20 to 25 years. Trevor exhaled slowly. On the civil side, we're seeking restitution for 4 victims, Amanda continued. She gestured to Eleanor. Eleanor tapped her laptop. The whiteboard lit up with a timeline. Preston's been doing this for 26 years. 4 victims. Robert Crawford in 1998, $1.8 million. He died in 2003 without recovering anything. Martha Williams in 2005, $900,000. She died in 2010, estate never paid. Fiona Garrett in 2012, $3.2 million. She's alive and ready to testify. And Calvin Barlow in 2024, $60 million attempted. Stopped before he could take anything. Amanda leaned forward. Preston targeted vulnerable people, widows, elderly clients, family under financial pressure. That's a pattern. And patterns are powerful in court. What about the money? Trevor asked. Eleanor pulled up another screen. I've traced $4.2 million in offshore accounts. Cayman Islands. Shell companies Preston controls. He's been funneling stolen funds out of the country for years. Julian whistled. That's federal. It is, Amanda said. Money laundering and tax evasion. Preston's facing state and federal charges. She turned to the whiteboard. Trial's 3 days. Here's how we're structuring it. First day, we focus on the sabotage, the physical evidence. Brett Coleman testifies. He's got an immunity deal, so he'll tell the jury everything. Sheriff Wade Bennett walks them through the arrest and evidence collection. Julian presents the wire recording. By the end of day 1, the jury understands Preston tried to cause serious harm to Calvin. She moved to the next section. Second day, we establish the pattern. Fiona takes the stand and tells her story, 2012, 3.2 million stolen, 12 years, fighting for justice. Helena testifies about her father, Robert Crawford, 1998. An estate lawyer covers Martha Williams, 2005. By the end of day 2, the jury sees Preston's been doing this for decades. Third day. Eleanor added, we follow the money. I'll walk the jury through the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the forged documents. Bank records, contracts, expert testimony. We show them Preston didn't just steal, he hid what he stole. Amanda closed the file. The goal is simple, show the jury Preston isn't a businessman who made mistakes. He's a career criminal. What about the defense? I asked. Amanda's expression darkened. Roger Langford's good. He'll argue this is a family dispute. That Preston's being framed by a bitter father-in-law. He'll call character witnesses. She paused, and Natalie's testifying. Trevor's head snapped up. What? She posted Preston's bail, $500,000, mortgaged her parents' house. Trevor's face went pale. She's testifying for him. She is, but she knows what he did. Trevor, people believe what they want to believe, Amanda said. Natalie's loyalty is to her father. When she testifies, the jury will see how deep Preston's manipulation goes. It'll backfire. Trevor didn't look convinced. Trial starts January 15th, Amanda said. 3 days of testimony, then closing arguments. After that, it's up to the jury. She looked at each of us. Preston's lawyer will attack our witnesses. He'll try to discredit Fiona, paint Calvin as confused and vengeful. But we have the evidence. If we present it right, Preston goes to prison. After the meeting, Trevor and I walked to the parking lot in silence. You okay? I asked. He shook his head. Natalie's really going to testify for him. She is. I thought she'd see the truth. One some people can't, son. Not until it's too late. What if the jury believes her? They won't. Because we're going to tell them the truth. All of it. He nodded, though he didn't look convinced. 2 weeks later, the trial would begin. The first day would establish the sabotage. The second would reveal the pattern. The third would follow the money. And at the end, 12 people would decide whether Preston Pemberton walked free or spent the rest of his life in prison. When I walked into that courtroom, I'd face the man who tried to steal everything. And this time, the truth would win. The courthouse steps were cold under my boots, the January wind biting through my coat. Trevor walked beside me, his face pale but determined. Miles followed a step behind, hands shoved in his pockets. Ahead, the glass doors reflected the gray morning sky. Beyond them, a courtroom waited. And Preston. You ready, Dad? Trevor asked. I nodded. Let's finish this. We pushed through the doors. The courtroom was packed. Judge Patricia Holloway sat at the bench, silver-haired and stern, her gavel resting beside a stack of files. The jury box was full, 12 faces I didn't recognize, all watching as we entered. Reporters lined the back row, notebooks open. And at the defense table, in a dark suit and a calm expression, sat Preston Pemberton. He didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge Trevor, just stared straight ahead. His jaw set, his hands folded on the table. Behind him, Natalie and Lorraine sat in the gallery. Natalie's eyes were red, her face drawn. Lorraine looked smaller than I remembered, her hands clasped in her lap. Trevor, Miles, and I took our seats on the other side, victim's side, they called it. Helena sat behind us. Julian and Eleanor were somewhere in the back, ready to testify when called. "All rise." We stood as Judge Holloway settled into her seat. She scanned the room, her gaze sweeping over the packed benches, then nodded to the bailiff. Be seated. We'll begin with opening statements. Prosecutor Foster, you may proceed." Amanda stood buttoning her blazer and walked to the center of the room. She faced the jury, her voice clear and strong. "This is a case about greed disguised as family. Preston Pemberton targeted his own son-in-law's father to steal a fortune. He manipulated. He lied, and when legal methods failed, he conspired to cause serious harm. The evidence will show that Preston Pemberton is not a concerned father-in-law. He's a predator." She sat down. Roger Langford stood, tall, polished, confident. Preston Pemberton is a father who tried to protect his daughter's future from an aging farmer's poor decisions. There's no conspiracy here, no crime, just a family misunderstanding that spiraled out of control. The prosecution will try to paint my client as a villain, but the evidence will show he's simply a man who cared too much. He sat. Judge Holloway nodded. "Call your first witness." Sheriff Wade Bennett took the stand. His uniform crisp, his expression serious. Amanda walked him through the arrest. "The night Brett Coleman was caught in my barn. The tools, the cut brake line, the $5,000 in cash found in Brett's truck." "And what did Mr. Coleman say when you arrested him?" Amanda asked. "He said Preston Pemberton hired him, paid him half up front to tamper with Mr. Barlow's tractor." Langford objected twice, but the judge overruled both times. The evidence was clear, documented, undeniable. Brett Coleman was next. He looked smaller on the stand, his hands fidgeting, his eyes darting toward Preston and then away. He'd taken an immunity deal, testify truthfully, avoid prison time. "Mr. Coleman," Amanda said, "did Preston Pemberton hire you?" "Yes." "What did he ask you to do?" Brett swallowed. "He said the old man, Mr. Barlow, was a danger, that he was making bad decisions. He wanted me to make sure there was an accident with the tractor." "And what did you understand that to mean?" "I understood he wanted me to cut the brake line, make it look like equipment failure." Langford stood. "Objection. Did Mr. Pemberton explicitly say harm or injure?" Brett shook his head. "He didn't say those exact words. He said, remove the problem. But I knew what he meant." The jury leaned forward. Then it was Trevor's turn. He walked to the stand, his shoulders straight, his voice steady. I'd never been prouder of him. Amanda asked him about the last 3 years. The debt, the pressure, the promises Preston had made, the Thanksgiving dinner, the push. "When did you realize your father-in-law was manipulating you?" Amanda asked. Trevor looked at me. "When my father showed me who Preston really was, the bankruptcy, the fraud, the victims. I'd been lied to for 3 years. And what did you do?" "I helped my father stop him." Langford cross-examined, tried to paint Trevor as disloyal as a son turning on his family. But Trevor didn't flinch. "I didn't turn on my family," Trevor said. "I protected it." Then Amanda played the wire recording. The courtroom went silent. Every eye turned toward the speakers as Preston's voice filled the room. "Ma, Brett's handling the tractor tonight. One cut in the right place and it'll look like equipment failure." A juror in the front row leaned forward. "Your father's had 70 good years. Now it's your turn." Natalie's face went pale. Lorraine closed her eyes. "If something happens to him, you inherit faster." The recording ended. The silence was deafening. Judge Holloway looked at the jury. "We'll adjourn for the day. Court resumes tomorrow at 9. The gavel came down. Outside, the cold air hit me like a wall. Trevor and I walked down the courthouse steps, reporters shouting questions we didn't answer. Miles stayed close, a hand on his father's shoulder. And then Natalie appeared. She stepped in front of Trevor, her eyes blazing. "You destroyed him." Trevor stopped, looked at her. He destroyed himself. He's my father, and he tried to have mine hurt, or worse. Natalie's voice cracked. I'll never forgive you for this. Why, I know, Trevor said quietly. But I can live with that. She turned and walked away, Lorraine trailing behind her. Miles squeezed his father's shoulder. You did the right thing, Dad. Trevor nodded, though his eyes were red. That night I stood on the porch, looking out over the farm. The trial had only just begun. Tomorrow the jury would hear from the victims. Fiona, Helena, the estate lawyer for Martha Williams, and Preston's past 26 years of lies and theft would be dragged into the light. I couldn't sleep, because the hardest testimony was still ahead. Tuesday morning, day 2. The courtroom was just as packed as the day before, but the energy had shifted. Yesterday was about the sabotage, the immediate threat. Today was about the pattern, the history, the long trail of victims Preston had left behind. Fiona raised her right hand and swore to tell the truth. Amanda Foster stood. Ms. Garrett, please tell the jury what happened in 2012. Fiona's voice was strong, clear. In 2012, Preston Pemberton took everything I had. $3.2 million. My husband had just passed away. Heart attack. He was 49. That money was his life insurance, our savings, everything we'd built together. Preston told me he could help me invest it. Farmland development, he said. Low risk, high return. And what happened? 6 months later, the company dissolved. Preston disappeared. The investment was fake. The contracts were forgeries. I'd been cleaned out. Did you take legal action? I sued him. But he'd covered his tracks. Shell companies, offshore accounts. My lawyer couldn't prove fraud. We settled out of court. I got nothing. Amanda pulled out a document. And after the settlement, did Preston contact you? Fiona's jaw tightened. He came to my apartment, late at night. Told me if I kept pushing, I'd lose more than money. Yeah, what did you do? I didn't stop. I spent 12 years collecting evidence, waiting for someone to take me seriously. She looked at Preston. And now here we are. The jury watched her. Every word, every breath. Helena Crawford was next. Her voice shook when she spoke, but she didn't cry. Preston defrauded my father in 1998. Robert Crawford. $1.8 million. Land fraud. Dad spent 5 years fighting to get it back. He died in 2003. Broken. She presented forged contracts, documents showing Preston's pattern, same shell companies, same fake developments, same lies. Martha Williams' estate lawyer testified about the 2005 case. Conservatorship abuse. Unauthorized withdrawals. $900,000 drained from an 82-year-old woman's accounts, while Preston held power of attorney. Eleanor Walsh took the stand after lunch. She walked the jury through the money trail. Charts, bank records, offshore accounts. Preston Pemberton has $4.2 million hidden in the Cayman Islands, Eleanor said. Money traced back to Robert Crawford in 1998, Martha Williams in 2005, and Fiona Garrett in 2012. He's been living off stolen money for 26 years. She clicked through slides showing the flow of funds, victim accounts, emptied shell companies, activated offshore transfers completed. This isn't a man who made bad investments, Eleanor said. This is a man who's been running a criminal enterprise for decades. Then it was my turn. I walked to the stand, my hands steady. Amanda asked me about the farm, about Trevor, about Preston's plan. Preston tried to take my farm through my son, I said. When that didn't work, he conspired to cause me harm. He wanted the mineral rights beneath my land. And what are those rights worth, Mr. Barlow? I looked at the jury. $60 million. A woman in the front row gasped. A man in the back leaned forward. $60 million, Amanda repeated. Yes, oil and gas rights. Preston knew, and he was willing to do anything to get them. Wednesday, day 3. Natalie took the stand for the defense. She was crying before Roger Langford even asked his first question. My father made mistakes. I know that. But he's not a murderer. He's not a monster. He's my dad. Langford nodded sympathetically. Thank you, Natalie. Amanda stood for cross-examination. Ms. Pemberton, did your father tell you about the mineral rights? Natalie hesitated. No. Did he tell you he was bankrupt? That he owed $8.2 million? No. Did he tell you about Fiona Garrett, Robert Crawford, Martha Williams? Natalie's face crumpled. No. So everything you believed about your father was based on what he chose to tell you. Not the truth. Natalie couldn't answer. She just sat there, tears streaming down her face. Closing arguments were brief. Amanda stood before the jury. 4 victims. 26 years. $6 million stolen. Preston Pemberton is a predator who hides behind the word family. He manipulated his son-in-law. He tried to steal a farm, and when that failed, he tried to cause serious harm to a 68-year-old man. The evidence is overwhelming. Langford tried. He painted Preston as a man caught in unfortunate circumstances. But the wire recording the victims, the money trail, it was too much. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. At 4 o'clock, they returned. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman stood. We have your honor. On the charge of conspiracy to cause serious harm, how do you find guilty? And on the charge of fraud, guilty. And on the charge of elder abuse, guilty. On the charge of attempted theft, guilty. Preston didn't move, didn't react, just stared straight ahead. Natalie buried her face in her hands. Lorraine sat perfectly still. Judge Holloway called for immediate sentencing. Preston Pemberton, you have exploited trust, manipulated family, and caused immeasurable harm. I sentence you to 18 years in federal prison. You will not be eligible for parole for 12 years. She turned to the restitution. To Fiona Garrett, $5.1 million, including 12 years of interest. Fiona closed her eyes. To Helena Crawford, on behalf of Robert Crawford's estate, $3.6 million. Helena nodded, tears sliding down her face. By Martha Williams' estate, $1.7 million. How Calvin Barlow, $500,000 for legal fees and trauma. Total restitution, $10.9 million. All offshore accounts will be seized. Preston Pemberton's remaining assets will be liquidated. The gavel came down. Outside the courthouse, Fiona found me on the steps. She didn't say anything, just pulled me into a hug. Thank you, she whispered, for not giving up. Trevor hugged Miles. We did it, son. Miles nodded. Yeah, Dad, we did. Natalie walked past us, head down, Lorraine trailing behind. She didn't look back. A week later, she filed for divorce. 6 months later, Father's Day arrived. And this time, the table looked different. The grill was already smoking when I set the last chair around the picnic table. 4 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon in late June, and the Iowa sun hung warm over the back 40. 6 months had passed since the trial. 6 months since Preston Pemberton was convicted and sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. The farm had changed. New equipment sat in the shed. The south field had been replanted with soybeans. We were looking at a record yield this fall, but the biggest change was standing 20 feet away, flipping burgers on the grill. Trevor had moved back to the farm in February. We'd renovated the old guest house for him and Miles. My son worked the land now full-time. His hands were calloused again. The $850,000 debt Preston had hung around his neck was gone, paid off with part of the mineral lease. Trevor didn't owe anyone anything anymore. The divorce had been finalized in March. Natalie and Lorraine had left Iowa. Miles, 19 now, had chosen to stay. Tires on gravel announced the arrival of guests. Helena Crawford's sedan, Julian Sawyer's truck, and Fiona's rental car from Lincoln. Pastor Covington came with his wife. Vernon Hutchins from the feed store showed up with his grandson. Martha Callahan brought corn from her garden. By 4:30, the table was full. Trevor carried the platter of burgers over, and I waved everyone closer. Before we eat, I said, I want to say something. The conversations quieted. Miles sat beside me, Helena across the table. Fiona stood near the end. This isn't the first Father's Day I've celebrated on this farm, I began. But it's the first one in a long time that feels right. 6 months ago, a jury heard the truth. They heard from Fiona, who waited 12 years for justice. They heard from Helena, who spoke for her father. They heard from Trevor, who had the courage to stand up to Preston. And because of that, he's sitting in a federal prison, and he'll be there for a long time. I looked around the table. But today isn't about him. It's about what we've built back. Trevor's debt is paid. Miles is starting college this fall at Iowa State. And this farm, we leased 60 acres to Apex Energy, $2.5 million upfront, 18% royalties. The rest, 320 acres, is in a conservation trust. It'll stay in the family protected for as long as there's a Barlow to work it. I smiled. And we used some of that money to set up a fund at the co-op, helps young farmers get started. Helena helped with the paperwork. It's called the Mary Barlow Agricultural Fund. Helena's voice cracked. She'd be proud, Calvin. I gestured to the head of the table. Trevor, you're sitting here. He frowned. Dad, that's your spot. Not anymore, I said. You've earned it. He stepped forward and sat down. Pastor Covington said grace. We thanked God for the meal, for the farm, for justice, and for the people gathered here. He mentioned Mary by name, and I felt the ache of her absence soften into gratitude. After we ate, Trevor and I walked out to the south field. The sun was sinking, painting the sky amber and rose. The soybeans were knee-high, rustling in the breeze. I'm sorry, Dad, Trevor said quietly. For all of it. I stopped walking. You were manipulated, but you figured it out. You stood up. That's what matters. $60 million, he said. That's what Preston was after. Yeah, I said. But he's not getting a dime. And we're still standing. We walked back as the first stars appeared. The guests were leaving Helena, Julian, Pastor Covington. Fiona lingered by her car. You going to be okay driving back tonight? I asked. She smiled. I'll be fine. I've got a meeting tomorrow in Omaha. The Garrett Fund is picking up steam, 3 new cases this month. Mary would have liked that, I said. Fiona hugged me, then drove away. Trevor and Miles were cleaning up when I walked back. The grill was cooling the chairs stacked against the barn. I stood on the porch, looking out over the land. Miles came up beside me. Grandpa, do you think we'll ever hear from Mom again? I don't know, son, I said. But whether we do or not, you've got family here. Your dad, me, and a whole community that's got your back. He nodded and went inside. Trevor joined me on the porch a moment later, a beer in each hand. He handed me one and we stood watching the stars come out. Happy Father's Day, Dad. Happy Father's Day, son. The wind carried the scent of fresh earth and growing soybeans. The farm was quiet, but it was alive. And so were we. In the end, the best inheritance I can leave isn't land or money. It's a son who knows who he is, and a grandson who'll remember where he came from. And to you listening to this story, remember this. I didn't almost lose everything because the land failed me, or because I was weak, or because time caught up with me. I almost lost everything because I stayed silent when my instincts were screaming. I told myself things would fix themselves. I told myself family wouldn't cross certain lines. I was wrong. If there's one lesson I want you to take from this family story, it's this: betrayal rarely arrives as an attack. It comes dressed as concern. It comes smiling at your dinner table. It comes from people who say, "I'm doing this for your own good." I ignored the signs. I ignored the distance growing between my son and me. I ignored the way power shifted quietly until I was no longer welcome at the head of my own table. I convinced myself patience was wisdom. But patience without action is just fear wearing a polite mask. That mistake nearly cost me my life, and it nearly destroyed my family story forever. I'm not proud of how long it took me to stand up. I should have spoken sooner. I should have asked harder questions. I should have trusted my gut the first time it warned me. So let me say this clearly from one man to another: don't be like me. Don't wait until humiliation or danger forces your hand. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Here's my personal belief, and I'll own it. Plainly, respect doesn't come from blood alone. It comes from truth, boundaries, and courage. Family doesn't mean blind loyalty. Family means accountability. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be manipulated. I also believe this dad revenge isn't about anger or payback. Real dad revenge is choosing justice over bitterness. It's protecting what you built, not destroying what others build. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth. And when the truth came out, everything else followed naturally. That's why this isn't a story about violence. It's a dad revenge story about clarity, courage, and consequences. There was a moment when I realized I couldn't do this alone. That asking for help wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. And I believe God put the right people in my path at the exact moment I was ready to listen. Not to save me from pain, but to walk me through it with my integrity intact. If you're listening right now and seeing pieces of your own life in this family story, hear me carefully. Don't let anyone isolate you. Don't let shame keep you quiet. Don't let fear convince you that silence is safer than truth. Protect what matters while you still can. And let me add this. My opinion, plain and simple: power reveals character. When someone needs to control you to help you, they're not helping. They're taking. And if you're ever forced to choose between comfort and honesty, choose honesty every time. That choice saved my relationship with my son. It saved my legacy. It saved my peace. In the end, this dad revenge wasn't about winning in court. It was about standing tall when it mattered most. It was about teaching my grandson that dignity is non-negotiable. That's the kind of inheritance that lasts longer than land or money. If this story made you think, I'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in my place if you believe stories like this can help others? Consider sharing this video with someone who needs it. And if you want to keep hearing meaningful stories like this, subscribing to the channel is a quiet but powerful way to support us. Thank you truly for staying with me until the very end. And just a final note before we part: upcoming stories on this channel may include fictionalized elements carefully crafted for reflection and learning. If that style of content isn't for you, feel free to explore something that fits you better. But if you're staying, welcome. We're glad you're here.